If you don't already subscribe to History Debunked, I suggest you should. Simon Webb's last few streams have been on a particular theme, and it is that of changing the culture, as BLM have been wanting Western governments to do. What is this culture? I think we still believe that the culture is patriarchy and we need to turn it into matriarchy, and this explains why so many jobs would have been given to white middle class men with suitable qualifications is not being given to them, but instead to young women who are not white and then maybe don't do the job quite so well and get into trouble. There has been a suggestion that they might be over promoted female mediocrities, and it is possible that women with their feminine privilege often are excused for their incompetence and weaknesses because, well, that is the nature of feminine privilege, and a lot of men have been primed to come riding to their rescue as white knights. Has this any long-term consequences for society? I believe so. I think we should live in a gender-balanced society, since it is roughly true that roughly half the people in the world are men and women. So there is no reason to prioritize the preferences of one over the other, unless it is for very good reasons. If we have the right sort of rules, we women will find that men do a lot of things for us anyway. And a lot of what they do is unthinking and instinctive. An example that was the protective instinct that I gave earlier. What they tend to do instinctively is to say they'll rescue. They will rescue a damsel in distress as a show of masculinity and worthiness to secure sexual access to her. Our fairy stories are full of these happy endings of a white knight riding to the rescue of a distressed damsel. And many feminine stratagems are about appearing to be distressed and attracting the attention of men who will fight other men to gain her favor. Because a lot of these feelings are unacknowledged, people do not really think that they are acting on them because they are subconscious. People who are more analytical, such as I, will of course look behind the apparent motivations for these things. The man most likely to ride to the rescue of a damsel in distress would be a man currently without a partner and desiring one. Now, society can change, well, government can change the behavior of people by changing the laws, by encouraging people to do what they want, which may or may not be in the national interest, and discouraging from what they might want to do. And it all depends on the consequences of these policies. Now, currently, the debate, the culture war is between patriarchy and matriarchy, as I see it. Other people seem to think it's between Jews and Gentiles, blacks and non-whites. Whites and non-whites, or blacks and non-blacks, or whatever combination you wish to frame it in, such as labour and capital and old and young, and of course the political debate is really about what it really is and what you can usefully frame the debate as, in order to arrive at the desired conclusion. Obviously, the laws changing so quickly and unpredictably and fundamentally is causing great distress and alarm. And Simon Webb is expressing this quite clearly and consecutively. And his last video was about it now being proposed that it will be a criminal offence to discourage your offspring from being gay or transgender. And of course, this totally undermines parental authority, particularly that of paternal authority, since all children have both parents, and obviously the input of the father is just as important. But since most children are singly parented these days, the absence of the father will have an effect on what decisions are made on behalf of the minor in question on potentially life-changing matters, such as having or not having the operation to become a member of the opposite sex. These issues go fundamentally to the issue of identity. While we assert our different identities as a way of asserting status over others, there are fundamental aspects of our identity that cannot be changed. We are either men or women. We were either born with male sex organs or female sex organs, and if we don't like what we were born with, should we change it through a series of operations or not? And if we do, does this mean we're mentally ill or not? And if our government allows us to change our sex through a series of intrusive and irreversible operations, is it a good thing or not? Or is it even a sign that the government is mad and evil? Are these things being discussed at any level? It doesn't appear to be discussed in the Houses of Parliament, or those in the Houses of Parliament are not exactly trusted by the general public. So there is an issue of trust. The men seem helpless. Simon Webb is not a young man. His subscribers are not, it seems, youngish men. They are of a certain age, and they do not seem to be in touch with the next generation, presumably because they are childless or have been estranged from their former spouses and their children, if any. So therein lies the problem of a society in transition from being an advanced society into a declining, a primitive, a degenerate society. Of course, nothing too alarming is happening just yet, except the encroaching miasma of restrictions on our speech and liberty. But we still have a roof over our heads and food in our bellies. But those of us who use our reason and think about politics and wonder about the future, we would be concerned because it doesn't appear that the government cares about such things, and it is obviously more interested in suppressing discussion of these topics and promoting same for others who are similarly concerned. Why don't they want to talk about it? Do they not care? Perhaps they do care, but they're too afraid. What makes them afraid? Are they afraid of each other? And if so, what is it that they fear? And if it seems that more people are behaving irrationally and believing in nonsense, then it is something that should cause us concern. But then, ultimately, the worst case scenario is that nobody is in charge. Nobody is in charge. Those above us don't know what they're doing or are too afraid to say, and do not even want to know how bad the situation is. And they don't want us complaining and upsetting them with our fears and anxieties. So the situation is worse than we thought. But that tends to prove me right, does it not? That nobody is in charge. What can be done about the situation of there being no one in charge? Well, it is really very simple. When all else fails, we are only left with the option of appealing to a hypothetical supreme authority, even if we're not sure that he exists, because we are rats backed into a corner without any apparent hope. What are we to do if above us is corruption, evil, and incompetence, and below us are morons and vegetables bumping along at the bottom that we don't wish to join, wanting to blame Jews and Muslims and not being able to see things through a more socio-psychological, cultural perspective. Such people do not take easily to abstract ideas. They only respond to visual cues, as you would expect lower animals. They don't like analysing things too much. And if they do, it would be in the crudest possible terms. Now, the purpose of believing in the Abrahamic God is, I think, to regularly make us think in abstract terms about truth, about logic about morality, I think that is really the purpose of the abstraction known as the Abrahamic God. And with that idea comes a question of our correct perception of this entity. What are the attributes of the Abrahamic God? And it seems to me obvious. I'm having some difficulty persuading people who are culturally Christian about the truth of my claims, which is that you don't have to believe in God to know what idolatry means. And you don't have to believe in God to know that the definition of idolatry and blasphemy is different for Jews and Muslims vis-a-vis Christians. There is a fundamental disagreement there. And while we know that in this life no one will know if God exists, we should occasionally ask ourselves, which version is correct, using our faculty of reason, should we not? We could ask ourselves, what would be the best religion to have if we needed a religion? And I don't think even atheists would deny that all societies need shared values to give the group a respectable, a dignified and protected identity. We also know that there are 5 world religions, and these are the biggest and most ancient groups. But we also know that when the West was feeling affluent and confident, it was mostly atheist until, through its atheist ways, lost its preeminence in the world. And now China is caught up, and it's making the Western nations nervous and aggressive. We know what Britain did to Germany in 2 world wars. Germany didn't want a war with Britain. It was just, well, seeing what it could do for itself. It was a European nation on the continent with more Germans than there were Frenchmen who had migrated to different parts of Europe, certainly to Russia, and it thought it could do better for itself. This is only understandable. We know for certain that Germany never wanted war with Britain. So why did Britain want war with Germany? It was because of the Thucydides trap that assails all declining empires. What seems to happen is that it sees a rival empire catching up, and what it likes to do is to turn around and shoot them down. And this was what Britain tried to do to Germany in 2 world wars. as far as the German war aims in World War One was concerned. Germany just wanted to give France a bloody nose. As recently as 1870, the Germans besieged Paris, invaded France and besieged Paris. The British didn't lift a finger to help the French. And so, in 1914, the Germans thought they'd do the same. Things had changed, of course. But how were the Germans to know? How can we know who is going to be reasonable? I'm sure we all know of occasions when we expect our loved ones, our spouse, our parents, our children, our business partners, our lovers to be reasonable about something. We assumed that they would be reasonable, and they were not. They took the very opposite position of being reasonable and, well, were very unreasonable indeed and caused damage to good relations or whatever it was that they did. So it is not always reasonable to expect others to be reasonable. But it would be reasonable to learn from our mistakes. But I see that there is little desire amongst British historians or intellectuals to ask difficult questions about their own history. I think the general attitude is that we made a mistake, let's not talk about it, because otherwise we would be embarrassed by the mistakes we made. Well, the motivation for this attitude is understandable. There is a danger of not learning from mistakes, not learning from very, very expensive and disastrous mistakes, and this means that we might do it again. And now, the further we are from the First and Second World Wars, the more neurotic it is that the British government has become. A neurosis is a blockage in our thinking. It stops us from doing the right thing. We may all suffer from neurosis without realizing it. Our friends may indulgently say of us, "Oh, she's always been like that, but she's all right really if you don't engage with her on this or that subject, then you can have a quite pleasant conversation or time with him or her." So it has to be acknowledged that we all have blind spots. We may be doing the wrong thing, and that is why free speech is so important. That we allow our engagement with the people around us so that necessary information eventually filters through. Particularly with blind spots, maybe we don't know how annoying we are about something or other, and maybe we need to be told more than once to stop doing something or other. And if we are in isolation or if we are avoidant of certain things and conversations, then we are obviously depriving ourselves of the good advice that we ought to heed. So I always make it a point to let as much information through as possible. Maybe I don't listen to it immediately. But if I were to cast my mind back, I would, have a list of things that I know people usually say in response to what I say. Now, back to the subject of the danger of not having a gender balanced society when either the female or the male preference is always prioritized. I think the reason we are behaving like this is because it is really marriage that is a pivot on which true gender justice lies. So if most people were married, the law would have to support this. I mean, the law would have to already support this, support marriage for most people to be married. And once most people are married, they would have a way of dealing with, each other and have a working arrangement to make life between a man and a woman tolerable. And this would be what they do. And, people would have, stock advice to wives and husbands about, annoying wives and husbands and how to deal with them. But because most people are living on their own, having had a series of failed relationships, things are rather different, and there is mutual antagonism between the sexes. And we may be in danger of a situation called complementary schismogenesis, in which, even by which, through mutual misunderstanding, a bad situation is exacerbated by behavior designed to correct it. For example, you're speaking to somebody who is speaking too loudly, and that person who is speaking too loudly is thinking that you're speaking too softly, and you keep lowering your voice to encourage this person speaking too loudly to speak softer, and the person speaking too loudly, who thinks you're speaking too softly, is raising his voice to encourage you to follow his example by speaking more loudly. So in the situation of men and women who obviously don't like living with each other and aren't having enough babies and are always complaining about immigration because they're not having enough babies, they're not bringing up their children properly because they don't stay in the marriage long enough, and because of the situation of democracy, which makes it difficult for sitting governments to address long-standing social and systemic problems. They don't want to fix education either, and this means school leavers are getting stupider and more ignorant and just not attractive employees. And this creates an increasing demand for foreign labour, which probably makes the idea of bombing Muslim countries to steal their oil and then get the Muslim refugees to come to the West as cheap labour, an apparently viable model of sustainability. So I think that's what's really happening. I mean, there may be others who think there's some sort of Jewish conspiracy or whatever, but I think really it boils down to people doing their thing to suit themselves, to look after their own patch. And this obviously causes problems for the rest of society because it's uncoordinated. It is basically, these different groups fighting each other. And when the political establishment fight each other, it means we are in a state of civil war. And if the different sexes are fighting each other, then, well, things will be difficult. The birth rate will decline. The next generation will be more neurotic and hate their parents. And there will be a generation gap. There will be conflict between rich and poor, majority and minority, and that sort of thing. And the generations will fear to speak to each other. I've read a lot of complaints now, and in real life too, about parents complaining about how woke their children are. So we can see why a lack of shared values is very destabilizing. And that's why we need a moral system, and included in this category of the moral system is religion or secular political ideology. And it seems obvious to me that you choose the moral system with something for everyone that takes into account the material needs of individuals in society, as well as their spiritual needs, that they need to feel that they are being well governed, and this will make them more likely to trust the government and do what it says. But because of a sense of injustice, they're not doing it. And that's why you have, so much vaccine reluctance, so much hatred and contempt for the government. And also, it is the arrangement of the class system, or even caste system. The difference between a class and caste system is that a caste system is rigid. You're not even supposed to marry out of your caste. That's how the Hindu caste system is arranged, so that the genetic stock of each caste is in a way fixed. And India is a fallen civilization, and I think we should be able to deduce why India is a fallen civilization. It's a twice fallen civilization because it was first conquered by the Muslims and then by the Christians. This should teach us a lesson about, what religion to avoid. And so if we avoid the Eastern religions, we are only left with 3. And since we are mostly not Jews, we're only left with 2. And since Christianity is kaput because of its idolatry, there's only 1. So I would suggest that the best religion to have is the one with the most powerful God, and the one with revealed scripture, and also one which has been in existence for quite a while, for example, 1400 years. It seems to me that the logic of this is unassailable and undeniable, but nobody wants to discuss it. which is very disappointing. But then the fact that nobody wants to discuss it confirms the correctness of my diagnosis that we live in a matriarchy, and in a matriarchy, people are only guided by their whims and fancies and emotions and subjective views, and there is no appeal to objective truth. Well, patriarchy is. Well, patriarchy can only be sustained by a belief in a hypothetical supreme authority who makes the laws for them to follow. This must be true because the only way that would make most people prepared to make the sacrifices of marriage is the ability for the belief that cheating will always be found out and punished. I think this is to do with the nature of the sexual act, which can only take a few minutes. And this means that most people, if they don't believe in God, will think they'll get away with it. So the only way, I think, to ensure that a workable relationship that is supported by law exists between men and women, in order to keep the group in existence, must be through reforming the laws relating to marriage. And I know I've said it a lot of times, but nobody seems to be able to accept that, and I think it's because of the incels who make up the nationalist community, and also the people, the politicians in government who are mostly female these days, who hold a lot of sway and have the laws in their favor, with the Me Too movement, the ability to make accusations of historic sexual offence against men, and the ability to be believed. This is very tragic because there's a lot of. I mean, there is one verse in the Old Testament that does very clearly say that no man shall be convicted on the uncorroborated testimony of one witness. 2 or 3 must be found. And this is an obvious principle of natural justice, which atheist politicians of the West now are even too shy to invoke. So it does look pretty hopeless. But it would be rational to be hopeful just because, well, it's useful, isn't it? It's useful to have faith in the future. Otherwise, we would just, throw ourselves off cliffs and castles and bell towers and things. I was talking to somebody earlier about whether the universe was created or uncreated. And superficially, you'd think, well, we weren't there. How could we possibly know what why would we care anyway whether the universe was created or not? But I think it generates a chain of logic towards a particular conclusion. Now, what is most intriguing about this debate about whether the universe was created or uncreated is really the preferences of people who want the universe to be uncreated. Why do they want that? Because they want there not to be a God that is a living God that occasionally intervenes in human affairs and answers prayers. And of course, those people would say, well, it's hard to believe, and therefore probably false. The Abrahamic God, because he's meant to be in perfect control, eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal and supreme, who knows our hearts and minds. Well, it's barely conceivable, and therefore it is easier to believe in a universe that has no God, so that we can do what we like. So there are two schools of thought. So you think it's easier to believe in this, godless universe. So I'll believe in it, so I won't feel such a fool, and also I can, enjoy all the things that would otherwise be considered sin, such as eating pork, breaking the Sabbath, having sex with people we're not married to, gambling, drinking, and all kinds of things. But such a view would be selfish. Obviously we want to have fun, but we are the beneficiaries of previous generations who did make those sacrifices to somehow bring us into existence. After all, we do have ancestors who managed to marry and have children, or maybe they didn't marry, but they still had children, and eventually we came into being. And we can choose to be the weakest link or stop being the weakest link. And if you put it in this way, I think it becomes obvious what we should do, but won't do. So back to the question of whether the universe was created or uncreated. I think most people are now agreed on the Big Bang, whether we are theists or atheists. So atheists would say, well, we all know it was a Big Bang that created the universe, and the religiously inclined would say, but who or what caused the Big Bang? And of course, the answer must be a creator. And when we think in those terms, then it becomes logical to follow the laws given by such a creator and not. Wouldn't it? And if you're not quite persuaded, then the irritant to Gentiles i.e. the existence of Jews, would be a warning and reminder of what could happen to you if you don't obey these laws, and the good things that could happen to you if you do obey them. I think there is an interpretation of the existence of Jews that could be said to be evidence of God. I know that there can only be arguments for or against the existence of God and for or against obeying what are said to be his laws. But if we do decide to obey his laws, it seems so obvious which scripture we should follow. I mean, obviously not the Torah, because most of us are not Jews. And also the Torah is very harsh with its 36 capital offences. But the Quran seems reasonable enough, because 6 theocracies in the world in existence today are Muslim. And if we want to have more recent examples of the failure of Christianity, we can use the American, French, and Russian revolutions as authority for the proposition that Christianity has been rejected 3 times already. And as for the institution of monarchy, well, it's an anachronism. It only worked. Kingship only worked when people only lived in small tribes. Obviously, in nations that cover an expanse of territory, such as China, it would be just crazy to only limit the political talent to just one's man's male relations. It must be obvious by now. And also for the fallen Muslim empires, they operated a harem system, because obviously, for most people, they would think, oh, well, there may be a problem of, my wife or my wives, giving me enough sons, because Henry VIII, with his 6 wives, it was 6, wasn't it? Yes, it was 6. He couldn't even have a son that survived into adulthood. So, and then of course they have a harem. But unfortunately, the problem was that every time the caliph, the emperor, died, there would be incidents of fratricide, because the only way to secure your own succession to the throne would be to kill your brothers. So that was a problem of orderly succession that defeated the Muslims then, until they arrived at the idea of an Islamic republic, which the Americans, I think it was the Americans that first started the idea. I mean, I really do believe that the American Republic was, Islamic in origin. And disappointingly, I haven't been able to find any Americans prepared to accept this principle or discuss it, because of their Islamophobia and their rejection of the truth, just because they think they can reject the truth. Because I can't make them admit to anything if they don't want to. So ultimately, when all else fails, we're only left with the option of invoking the protection of the hypothetical supreme authority. And this is what I advise people to do. How does one begin to do that after an entire lifetime of atheism? Is it really that hard? I don't think it is. A hypothetical supreme authority can become a well, yeah, you can stay hypothetical, but just the idea of bargaining with this deity would have the effect of kickstarting a relationship, of bargaining and negotiation. I think this must have been what Jews mean by Israel, meaning wrestling with God. I know that, a lot of Muslims, they go, how dare these Jews talking about wrestling with God? But I think anyone who has any sort of relationship with God, who asks for stuff, would find themselves wrestling with arguments about why, our dearest wish should be granted. Because we have been, good people and done good deeds, or if we haven't, then we have to resolve to be good and, do good deeds and refrain from bad deeds. So, whether God actually exists or not, this kind of internal dialogue would have the effect of improving the behavior of many individuals and therefore making your society a better place. So I think there's everything to be said for it. And as for atheists who find themselves uncomfortable with the idea, my advice would be for therapeutic reasons alone, to frame any prayer in a form of a legal document. Well, I mean, in the sense that you want to be, you want to very carefully ask for things. I mean, you wouldn't say things like, oh, God, just make me happy, because I don't really know what I want. I just want to be happy. And it's like, well, those kinds of prayers would be completely ignored. It's like, well, you don't know what you want. I'm not, it's like shopping for Christmas present. You prefer it when people say, for Christmas, I would like A, B, C, D, whatever it is, rather than, oh, don't bother with anything, but a little something would be nice, or and it just makes it difficult. So, if somebody says something specific and easy to get, then, you're more likely to get it, right? And I think for purely therapeutic reasons and for reasons of focusing the mind. So, you wish for a certain outcome and then you think, well, this is my route to my particular destination, and I want to pick up all these things on the way, to make my journey easier and whatever. And you would then be forced into thinking about the practicalities of your particular journey. So for me, what do I wish for? Well, I've said it so many times already. I just wish for somebody above me. Not actually the hypothetical extreme supreme authority, but somebody honourable and influential to engage with me on my ideas, who is of moral and intellectual respectability. But of course, the problem is that anyone already in a senior position in the Western political establishment would fear to lose it, and therefore they won't engage. Or if they did, they might find their reputations destroyed. So for me, for Gentiles, it'll be somebody in the media, somebody, senior in one of the major media outlets. And in theological terms, it would be, rabbis prepared to rank the four Gentile religions, and for Muslims, it would be, Muslims prepared to encourage Orthodox rabbis to rank the four Gentile religions. And I guess for Christians, the potential to acknowledge the idolatry and blasphemy of Christianity. And once all that is done, we would be closer to adopting secular Quranism with the particular characteristics of our Western nation. And this would make the world a better place. So that is the end of my little talk. At 2:30, Brundle is going, and I will be doing a Qurani Yule, 2:30 p.m. GMT. So come and join us.